it. Some of those concepts are really hard for fifth
Mhm.
graders. Some of them are really hard for adults.
Yeah.
I
Um,
agree, especially one who has a heart for math and teach science because it come with math.
yes, well, reach out
No,
with
but
questions.
they did well. You guys did really a really good job with those PowerPoints because not gonna lie, I followed them to a T because this is my first year doing fifth grade science and my second and fourth grade science, and I follow them to a T. So like they're really good.
And you're
Thank
doing
you.
fourth and fifth.
Yes.
She's doing a class of fourth and a class of fifth.
Oh, we have another teacher on here doing that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of prep. Um, yeah, the idea is, that they are designed that everything is there and you can use it as is, but we also encourage you to kind of tweak it and make it your own. Um, so good. I'm glad that it's working for you.
One thing I did put, I emailed this to everybody, but I did put it in the chat. So basically, I took the Nature of Science standards from the specs book and I just PDF those pages. So if you didn't get that in the email, I did put it in the chat. So you could access that because we do want to take a few minutes. We are going to look at that a little bit once we fully start here. Just going to do one more minute. Like again, we had over 70 people sign up for this. So, and we know today was a little weird with all the weather stuff going on. So, yeah. Yeah, there's quite a few people that are doing sort of a fourth and fifth model this year. So very cool. We'll have to see how that goes.
It is interesting though, because you're doing a lot of the same topics. So that's probably makes it a little bit easier, at least in science.
It
Oh,
it
yeah.
does. It does. And it seemed like we're like when I'm walking around campus and you see the second graders and the first graders and everybody else and out there, they seem to be on the same unit.
Yeah, the same topics.
Well, topics.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we're gonna jump right on into our topic for tonight. So hopefully you can see presentation. I'm doing something for the first time. I used Canva. Jen and I actually used Canva to make the presentation. So went away from PowerPoint. If you have not tried out Canva yet, I encourage you can do some really cool things. Oh, good. Look, I got hand claps going already. So some people that probably have used Canva before. And it was really cool to collaborate. So Jen and I were able to build the presentation relatively easy. It was kind of fun too, as you'll see some of my graphics and videos that pop up. I had way too much fun making this, which is awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about nature of science. If you saw in our timeline, we actually built in actual units, so actual nature of science units. In the past, we would always kind of embed pieces of nature of science, but a lot of times they weren't explicitly taught. Um, or maybe you were doing nature of science and didn't even know it, as we were talking earlier today. We didn't even know we were doing nature of science, but you were. So we actually thought it'd be a good idea to let's build in some actual units that cover these topics. So a couple things we're going to do tonight. We'll do a little unpacking of the nature of science and practice of science standards. Kind of take a look at that document that I emailed to you earlier. It's also in the chat that we can access that. We're going to preview the fourth and fifth grade units, those nature of science units, and hopefully have a little bit of time for any questions and answers at our very end. This is an hour and it's going to go pretty quick, I assume. Okay. So in the chat, I want you to think about this phrase. I really like this phrase. I know we always say the word nature of science, but I've been using this phrase a little bit more, the practice of science. So what does that phrase, the practice of science, mean to you? What do you think that means to you? Just put some couple of thoughts in the chat. The phrase, the practice of science.
We have someone that says she can't hear anyone, but then someone else joined in and said they just lost audio as well.
Oh,
So
thank you guys that put some
trying
things in the chat.
hands-on experiments, how we apply what we know, experiments, asking questions, good. Actually doing something physically, experiments and exploration, hands-on, always learning, it's continuing, active learning. I like active learning, good. Following the steps of a process and applying it to our learning, labs and experimenting,
Man,
exploring different types of science, ooh. Observing and sharing, trying out wonderings, yes.
these are great. Conducting experiments to test our own wonderings and questions. Parts of science experiments. Actively investigating question about the world. Following steps of a process. I would say every one of these is correct. Yeah, it's a multitude of different things. To me, practice of science is just those logical steps you go through when you're engaging in any type of science investigation. That there is some sort of process. No matter if you're doing a demonstration, there's a process for that. If you're doing inquiry, there's a process. If you're doing the scientific method, there is a process. So practice of science to me always makes me think of there's certain steps and certain logical pieces that go along to put it all together. When you're making observations, when you're creating conclusions or analyzing data, there's different things you have to think about and be aware of when you're doing certain science things. And it's not just an experiment. It could be going out and counting the squirrels on campus. There's a process. There should be some sort of process for that as well. So good answers. Yeah, none of those were incorrect. I think they were all good things to share. Yeah. I just like that term, practice of science. That's what kind of makes me think of. And we're going to take a little bit of time here and unpack the standards. And one thing about the scientific method, it's a reliable process used by scientists to explore and gain knowledge about the world they observe and study. So that's one part of science. As we're going to see as you guys look through the document, it's not the only type of science that we engage in, that we should be engaging. We should be multitudes of different types of science engaging in. Do you like the little robot moving? Is that cool? It's very nice. So when you look at our standards, we have these two large standards. They are very overwhelming. The big ones here for nature of science, there's the 5th grade one, and there's the 4th grade one. So very heavy, lots of vocabulary, lots of different pieces, sometimes a little overwhelming when you read these two particular one, but these are getting into basically the practice of science. You're defining a problem, maybe doing some research. You're going through some sort of process, no matter what it is, whether it's a field study, a demonstration, you're doing something with a model, maybe you're doing something with the scientific method and doing an experiment or inquiry or whatever it is. But there is a certain process that we're going through here. So that's what that N11, the big one, I call it, really spells out. And you can see the difference between the progression of fourth grade to fifth grade. So fourth grade is just raising questions using reference material, do a little research there, then conducting some sort of investigation, free exploration or systematic, so different types, and then making those explanations. And then when you get into fifth grade, it's a lot more. So making sure they're identifying variables, collecting data, interpreting data, charts, tables, graphics. So they got to be able to organize all the data. They've got to make it into an appropriate graph that matches the data, analyze the data, making predictions, and then also defending conclusions based on that data, being able to come up with explanations and also, be able to defend those. So yeah, those are two very big standards there. So what we want you to do there is we have the document. Remember, I sent this out a couple of days ago. You might have it digitally or you might have printed it out. We want to give you guys just a few minutes to look through those pages that I sent you. And what I want you guys to do is kind of highlight familiar terms and phrases. So highlight anything that is familiar to you, and underline terms or phrases that might need clarification. So when you go through the different parent benchmarks there. So it's pages 30 through 35, but I went ahead and already just printed them out for you. So instead of giving you the whole document, I PDF just the ones that are on Nature of Science. So you want to look through SC5 N11 and kind of look at those standards. You can look at your fifth grade and your fourth grade. Look through the benchmark clarifications. That's going to tell you exactly what they should know for those particular standards. And then there's also the assessment limits too, which may or might tell you what some, no, you're good. That might give you some extra information as far as where's that ceiling of the question, what they might ask. So, so we don't, a lot of times we don't want to go beyond the standard until they've mastered it. So that kind of gives you that little bit of a ceiling. So look through N11 and then N21, which gets into evidence and observations that are testable. Explanations always linked to evidence. So that focuses on that one. And then the final parent benchmark is N22. That's where we get into making sure that the experiment or whatever it is, demonstration, field study, whatever, is able to be repeated by others and copied by others. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to highlight some familiar terms and phrases, some things that you've hopefully heard before. And maybe there's some things you want to underline. I'm like, I'm not sure about this, or maybe more clarification. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 or so minutes to do that. So for the first one, N11, was there anything that needed clarification? Anything that was a little bit fuzzy or hazy? We're not sure about. If you want to put something in the chat, we can kind of address that. Again, the practice of science, and it's any type of science, even when the students are doing mineral properties, and they're using the streak plates and things like that. There's a process there. They're recording information, so it doesn't always have to be a scientific experiment with a testable question. There's all sorts of different types of science with this particular standard here. But was there anything, did anybody catch that we are okay with using the word hypothesis now? On page 31. Isn't that exciting?
That's what I was going to ask
Oh.
about. Say it said should not, but does that mean that they could?
So may use the term hypothesis, but will not assess the meaning of the term. But I would think they would need to know what it means.
Right. So that's why I'm confused, because it said items when it talk about the content limits, it said items should not use the term hypothesis. But
yeah.
Are you looking at the older version?
No, I'm looking. It's version 2.
They did send out the one that hopefully the one that I sent you was the right one. But they did an update.
Oh, I got this from the district-wide training, I guess.
Oh, okay. No. So that's why I sent you this new one. So they did an update. They updated a couple different things in the book, and one of the items there on page 31 says will not require the identification or evaluation of a hypothesis, but they might use the term hypothesis. Isn't that confusing?
Very.
Yeah. So in other words, we can go ahead and prediction, hypothesis. We can use those terms, right? Did anybody else?
I was just gonna say they're gonna see hypothesis in middle school anyway, but now we can just feel a little safer using both of those words. But we don't want to leave out prediction either, because they could really see either one on the test.
Right. Perfect. The other one that I saw was, we use dependent and dependent variable. But notice you might see interchangeably outcome variables and test variables. So that was on 31. So I know in the nature of science unit I kind of use those interchangeably. So you'll see those on the 4th grade nature of science lesson.
So the books that you had when you were at our school, I should have changed mine out or gotten it. So is the update in those books instead of the one I have?
No. Yeah,
No.
so the new one's on the DOE. We've printed it out.
Okay, so
And,
just
So the yellow booklets are the older version. The standards themselves have not changed. They've just added some clarifications,
Right.
updated a couple test questions, or the sample questions. If you look at the new one, the very last 2 pages are actually they show all the different changes on what page. So if you don't want to reprint the whole thing, you can just print out that last page and look. None of them are big changes. Nothing is going to really change your instruction.
Right. Yeah, it was just little subtle things like hypothesis and barometric pressure.
Yes, like we can use air pressure or barometric pressure now.
Right. Yeah.
Which helps with barometer.
Mm-hmm.
That would make sense, and it'll help them to better memorize the tool used to measure. Okay.
Right. Yep.
Anything else from N11? Those were the 2 big standouts. Anything from N21? So that one is we're getting into recognize and explain that science is grounded in observations that are testable. Explanations must always be linked to evidence. Big one there. No, cool. The one big thing I saw there was items, even though we might go in a certain order and steps, they're not going to be assessed on the order of the scientific method. They shouldn't get questions on what comes next after this. So there shouldn't be anything particular of some sort of order. Then it might test on a piece of it, but not a specific order. Jen, anything from that one that you?
No, I agree. I think we just really need to make sure that they understand that, and remember growing up, the scientific method, at least the way it was presented to me, was like, this is the way it is, and you follow from A to Z. So it's definitely still a good method to use. We just need to let them know that we don't always do every single step. We don't always do every single step in the same order. Different investigations require different steps. So we just want to make sure that we're not strictly teaching the scientific method.
Mhm. And then anything from into 2. This one's recognize and explain when scientific investigation is carried out. Evidence produced by those investigations should be replicable by others. So this is when they're doing their experiments and maybe one group is doing it and then the other group is doing it, but then their results are different. They should be sharing that and trying to figure out why they're getting different results and try to figure out those different types of methods or share different methods. I had some schools that are going to actually class A and class B are going to do experiment and actually come together and share the results from doing the same experiment and see what happens. So that's pretty awesome. Make sure you do that. And also repeated trials. So why do we, Jen and I were talking about this later, why should, do three trials is what you said that earlier, Jen. 3 trials is considered valid.
Minimum of 3 to make it valid.
Right. But we always say 10, like you'll always see our stuff, it says 10 trials. But the more trials you do, the more valid the experiment becomes.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that repeating trials. If you look at the standard 5N13, the last one listed on that page 34, it says recognize and explain the need for repeated experimental trials. The kids kind of get confused sometimes because there's repeated trials and then there's replication. And so that's 2 different things. Replication refers to someone else being able to repeat the experiment so that they can verify the results. Repeated trials is within one experiment. I'm going to make sure I do it multiple times so that I know my results are valid. So we really got to make that distinction for the kids between repeated trials and replication.
Yeah, these standards are a lot different than your content standards. These are more like logic based, thinking about science, the processes, the things you do when you're involved in scientific thinking or inquiry or any type of science. So it's a little different, sometimes a little tougher than just your basic content standards. So they can be challenging. Yeah. They can be challenging to teach. Cool. So thank you guys that shared. If you think of anything else as you're looking at it, go ahead and drop that in the chat as we move forward here. Remember, we were talking about this and we saw in the standard, not all science follows a scientific method. In the chat, what are some other scientific investigations? What are some different ones that you can identify besides just the scientific method? So if you want to put a couple examples in the chat, I think I named a few earlier, but let's see if you were paying attention, or maybe you have some other ones.
Field study, yes, excellent.
And we kind of changed a few years ago because we would always have everybody do a scientific method experiment.
Research.
Yeah, and then primary grades, it wasn't really age appropriate. So we started introducing to primary grades the field study, and they loved it. The kids were more involved. It was definitely more feasible for primary students to do field studies. So yeah. Simulations, models, yep. Engineering design process. Observations, model, yeah.
Excellent. We're going to talk about all those.
Sweet. Demonstrations, yeah. Anything. So with an experiment, the biggest thing, and sometimes I have a hard time with this, it has to be a testable question. So that's the biggest thing after wondering. They have to take that wondering, how can we form this into some sort of experiment that is testable? In other words, I can use tools of science, I can collect data, I can then use that data as evidence to back up a prediction and help me answer that question. So form a testable question. Once you have a hypothesis prediction, next step is design and execute an experiment to test it. A good experiment only changes one variable. So that's your independent test variable. And then just to let you know, we do have a new button up on Canvas. So resources on Canvas are there or coming soon to a theater near you. So that will be on Canvas. So know that that button is there, which we have a couple of units this year that are strictly for nature of science.
4th grade has 2, 5th
2.
grade has 1.
Perfect. Perfect. Sweet. It's all about the practice of science. So the purpose of these nature of science units is to formally engage learners in elements of the practice of science, perform scientific inquiry, and evaluate systems and evidence based on scientific knowledge. So there might be some content kind of in the background. So for 4th grade, they might create a windmill model. But we want to make sure what's out in the front is we're trying to understand this practice of science. We want to go through the process, research, moving into wonderings, and then moving into, can we form some sort of a testable question? And then how can we actually test it? What tools can we use? Can we actually then design an experiment to collect data, form a hypothesis? So that whole thing there. So there, yeah, we might have some content, but kind of put the content in the back on this one and put the nature of science, the practice of science to the forefront for this. So for 4th grade, we're going to use the windmill models to guide our inquiry. So how can we design and create a model? So we're going to use a model of a windmill to conduct a scientific investigation. If you were 4th grade last year, you did a little bit of this work, and it's a little different. There's more explicit teaching of some of these standards. There's videos that are specific to like N11 or N16, or so there's different things there, different pieces to help instruct on some of those things. And I put a little note in there. One thing we don't want to get bogged down in is we want to get into the practice of science. We don't want to spend 3 days of building our windmills because we want the content to be the nature of science, these standards, these practice of science standards. So we know the background content is windmills, and they should already have that. We did a little bit of this work already with earth science as renewable resources. But here's some things to help kind of move the science along. If you want to have the windmill models pre-constructed, so we're not spending 4 days on building windmills, that is totally cool. Model the collection with the whole class. I know a couple of people I interviewed last year did this. They would model the first, look at this, I even made one. So put my money where my mouth is. So I made my windmill, and it actually works. So if I can make one and it works, I know you guys can make one that works too. So the teacher would model like the prototype, and collect data and kind of guide them through that process. And then the students were actually able to go and do the test variable, whatever it was, if it was the one that had the bigger blades, or if they did something with weight or the length of the string or the type of paper, then the students were able to do that. So that was one way I saw successfully done that way. Another one was, like I talked about before, having Class A did one part of it, and Class B did the other part of the data, and then they actually brought the data together and shared it that way. It just helped them create more time as they were going through this whole process here. So it's cutting down on the building time, but also give me a little bit more time on instruction of the practice of science as well. I highly suggest that you make one yourself and test it out, so that way you can make it successful, like I did. And some things, some highlights. So day one in this unit is posted up there. The PowerPoint and everything is up there. Background knowledge. So they're going to obviously start with some background knowledge, a little bit of research. And that even gets into different types of science investigations. Day two is when they're going to build, or maybe already have them pre-made, or just have maybe a lot of the other work and the templates already ready to go. So they're not spending too much time building. So they're going to build and just making sure that their model is working. So that's a big thing for day two. Build the windmill, make sure it's actually working and doing what they want to do. And then day 3 through 6 is that's when we're actually constructing the scientific investigation using scientific method. And there's going to be some nature of science content building with some different videos and some different reading pieces that will help scaffold some of those nature of science areas. Day 7, they're actually going to analyze their data. So for whatever variable you guys decide you want to do, you'll be able to look at your charts and make an appropriate graph. So maybe it's not a bar graph, maybe it's some or the other sort of graph that's appropriate. I know 4th grade doesn't do a lot of graphing till the end, but just know that we talked to math department, and we want to make sure that they're doing some sort of appropriate graph. Maybe they're not doing the average. Maybe they're graphing the range or the median or something else, but it doesn't always have to be the average. Maybe if that's appropriate, sure. But just know that it should be an appropriate graph to go along with the data. And then obviously this sometimes is the hard part, is actually making scientific explanations. They've gone through the experiment, and now they have to actually look at their data, look at their observations, everything, all the evidence, and actually, okay, what actually happened? Does this evidence support my hypothesis? And a lot of times I'll see they'll say yes or no, it didn't work, but they never say why. So seldom do I see students actually get into the why of what happened, whether it did support the hypothesis or not. We want them to dig a little deeper into the science and talk about that. So adding that why piece to their explanations. Day 8, they'll do their assessment. And then day 9, a little debrief. So if there's a portion where you want to reteach, that will also be available. On additional resources, some really cool stuff. There's a Generation Genius lesson that kind of goes through scientific inquiry, and I actually broke it down into segments. So if you want to come back, even if you have time during the instructional days to do that, you can go back and use that Generation Genius lesson, and you can see how I segmented into times and asked a few questions for each piece. And there's some other resources, even some reading resources from like the Science Source or the handbook are actually really, really good. If you want to pull any of those research pieces and have students actually read texts about the processes of science. There's a mini assessment after day 5, and that is basically just going to cover N11. So that big one. So, and then as you can see, the final check at the end is only going to be 15 questions for a number of reasons. One, it's really hard to find questions on nature of science, as we found out. So this one will only be 15, and a lot of times they're a little bit more difficult with the formulas.
And
with the
longer.
nature of science. Yes, they're a lot longer, Jen. There might be charts and graphs that they have to analyze and look at. So that takes a little bit more time as well. So we thought maybe just doing 15 questions would be good moving forward there. Any questions on the 4th grade nature of science unit? Is that my last slide, Jen?
I believe so. Yep.
Okay, cool. Or any general questions up till now?
All right.
Cool.
So I think that makes it my turn, but my 4th grade friends, stick around because it's still really good nature of science information.
Yep.
I just have to switch over here to this one. Okay. All right. Is the presentation showing?
Looks good.
All right, excellent. All right, so we're doing nature of science for the first time ever. Not ever, sorry. First time explicitly ever. And it is, like Jamie said, the standards are big. They encompass a lot. So what I wanted to make sure to do today was kind of hit on some of those really, really important things. Because sometimes we get so caught up in going through an experiment, which we should, and there's good parts in there, we miss little tiny pieces. For example, there's the standard we talked about earlier, recognize and explain the need for repeated trials. That's an entire standard on its own, but we don't need to spend a whole day on it. But we should reference it multiple times. So I want to make sure I let you know all those really big key statements that we should be saying to our kids over and over, and they should hear it a million times so that they really understand these nature of science standards. So if I put it in green, that's your key for this is one of those things that I should be saying over and over to my kids, or I should be probing them and asking them questions. So the first one is all scientific investigations start with a question. So if I was in front of my class, that's what I would start with every day. What do all scientific investigations have in common? They start with a question. Conclusions are the logical explanations based on evidence. So where do we get that evidence from? Our evidence is collected from our observations, which by 5th grade and 4th grade, most of them know that we use our 5 senses for observations. And then science is grounded in evidence that is based on those observations. That's literally our standard. And there are questions that are as easy as being able to say, science is based on evidence. Evidence is based on observations. But they just need to hear that a lot to really have it sink in. So we're not going to go through every day, but I'm just going to give you a few peeks at what we're going to be doing. So this is the first day because nature of science standards can be kind of hard and overwhelming. I thought we'd start with something light and fun. So for their Ignite, I found this adorable picture and you can implement it how you want. And I was kind of envisioning it. I would be at the front with my chart paper and I would just have them kind of popcorn out observations. And at this point, we haven't really talked about the difference between an observation and an inference. So they might give you inferences, and that's totally fine. Just jot them down. They could also have them written in their notebook. They could compare with a partner. It's really kind of up to you. Was anybody brave enough to unmic or in the chat popcorn out some observations here?
I have observed 2 birds.
Oh, excellent. That is a good observation. What might the kids say?
That little bird is jealous, giving them the side eye.
Yes, that little bird has the perfect look. He's like, "Where's mine, man?" So I think that that's what they're going to see. And they're going to say, the little bird is angry or he's mad or he wants one. But we know those aren't actually observations. I'm going to look at some of these others. The bird has his mouth open. Excellent. That's an observation. I can see it. The bird's beak is open. The pelican, good. The pelican's mouth is pink. Very descriptive. Perfect. Why is his mouth so big? It's a good question. Both birds are white. Good. These are all observations. And so we're going to write these down as our kids are saying them, or they're going to jot them in their notebook, and don't correct them if they do an inference. That's fine. At the end of this day, once they've learned the difference between an observation and an inference, you'll come back to your chart paper and say, okay, now let's reread our statements and see if we can identify any of these as an inference. So that's kind of revisiting that Ignite and seeing how their thinking has changed. The pelican's mouth is larger than the seagull. Very true. Good observation. All right. If you've seen this one before, it's super cool. If you and if you haven't seen it, it's super cool. So they're going to see a series of pictures. And at this point, you'll have explained to them the difference between an observation, something that is based on fact. We really want to hone in on that. It's based on fact. It's something that can be seen, smell, taste, hear, and the other one I'm missing, touch. Okay, so you can say it's rough. You can say it's blue, right? These are observations. You can have quantitative observations. You can say there's 2 sets of footprints. There are pink footprints. There are blue footprints. Inevitably, screen colors will be different, and somebody will be like, they're green. So whatever color they see is fine. It's easy to practice this as well in social studies. Yes, it is. So some observation examples that you're looking for from the kids here would be things like there are 2 sets of footprints. This is the point where we're going to correct them. If instead they say to you, there's 2 animals, we're going to say, do you see animals? Can you actually see 2 animals there? No, we don't see animals. We see footprints, right? So we want to make sure at this point that they're actually giving us things that are just fact. Once they have made several observations, they're going to then use those observations and put it together to make an inference. So looking at those 2 sets of footprints, I can infer that 2 different types of animals are walking towards each other and are about to meet. And they might come up with a different inference, and that's fine. It's just based on their observations. So we're really pointing out that our inferences are based on logic and evidence that we observed. So after they do that, they're going to get another frame of the photo. And in the second frame, we can see that the 2 footprints intertwined. They are all mixed up. There are pink and green footprints gathered in a circular kind of area. So I can infer the 2 animals ran into each other and got into a fight. I always, if that's what their go-to inference is, I always challenge them with something else. Like, do I know they're getting into a fight? Could they be dancing? Right? So we're showing them that an inference is based on our observations, but it's not always necessarily fact. We're using the best information we have to make that inference. Our observations are fact. Our inferences are based on observations. And then they're going to see the last slide. And they get very sad on this slide.
Mm-hmm.
So we see the green set of footprints is moving toward the bottom right. The pink set of footprints is not in the 3rd frame. So I tried to be gentle and say one animal did not survive the fight and the other animal walked away. A lot of times they'll say that one of the animals was eaten. They'll come up with all sorts of things. They will come up with answers you never would have thought of. But it's really just to get them practicing, is it an observation or is it an inference? We're also going to take a look at the different types of investigations. We're just going to spend one day on that, and then we'll spend some more days on actually going through experiments, but we do want them to know all the different types. So just a quick overview. We have systematic observations. So just making observations in general is a form of investigating. I will be honest, before I became a science teacher, I used the words investigation and experiment interchangeably. And I still have to sometimes correct myself because they're not the same. And when we use them interchangeably, that throws the kids off. So we have to be really careful about that. These are all investigations, but they're not all experiments. So the second one is models. You can have 2D models like the life cycles, and you can have 2D models like the water cycle and 3D models like the life cycle. We use models to help us study things that are hard. Maybe they're too small to see, like the ant eggs. Maybe they're too large to see, like Jupiter. So we use models to represent objects or systems or processes that aren't easily studied as they are. The next one is simulations. I like to think of those as working models. So instead of just having a model to look at, it actually performs some function. So the first one, he can actually perform CPR on the dummy and get the practice. Whereas if we did it on an actual human for practice, we would injure them. So we have that dummy to simulate giving CPR. The other one, obviously, is our solar system. We can't go into space. We, the general human, can't go into space and, observe the planets revolving around the sun. So we create a simulation so that we can observe it and see how it works. Our next two are field study, which a lot of you said in the chat earlier. So scientists actually go out into the field or out into nature and they observe things, objects, plants, animals in their own environment versus doing something like in a lab, like we would generally think. And our last one is that experiment. So this is a really big important one. See those green words? We're going to make sure our kids know the difference between an experiment and an investigation. So in a controlled experiment, the scientists are performing investigations, but they're controlling variables, or sometimes we say manipulating variables. So experiments are different because we are controlling certain features or aspects of the investigation. Scientists, we already talked about, they need to do at least 3 for it to be considered valid. If we do 5, 10, 15, 20, we're just getting more and more accurate, and that's great, but a minimum of 3. If I only do it one time, I don't know if it was just a fluke. So we really want to stress to them a minimum of 3, the more the better. I'm getting a little notification that we're almost out of time, so I'm going to go quick through the last part. One of the investigations we're going to do is a real super simple one. All you need is penny per group, water, and a dropper or a pipette, which hopefully you can find those in the science lab. I know some of my old schools had a bunch extra. If not, you might be able to find them in Squirtfish lab and just borrow them from 3rd grade. Or you can get a huge pack on Amazon for not very much and share with your team. Oftentimes the kids get really excited about it. They think it's the coolest little tool. And if you get a big pack, you can send them home with them and they just have a blast. So the first one is going to be drops on a penny. And if you've never done drops on a penny, they're going to make a prediction or hypothesis of how many drops they think the penny will hold, and they'll drop them one at a time. When they make their prediction, they usually will say something like 3 to 5, somewhere in that range. And it actually is a whole lot more. and they get very, very surprised by how much that penny will actually hold. It's generally in the 20-ish range, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, depending on how, how much they're squeezing that dropper. In this investigation, I purposefully picked one that wasn't necessarily content related to our standards so that we can really just focus on that nature of science aspect, identifying control groups, identifying test groups, test variables, outcome variables. That's another thing that's a little tricky for the kids because you have your test group and you have your test variable, and those are two different things. So I tell them the control group is the one that is closest to normal conditions. And we need a control group because I need a normal set of data to compare and see if the thing I changed actually had any sort of effect. So they need to know what a control group is. That's a standard in and of itself. So really stress that control group, the conditions closest to normal. So students can just do 3 trials and use plants. How many kids don't choose this? Yes. Yeah, I've done plants in the past. I love plants. It's just you do have to, it adds up. We would test water and vinegar and coffee, and I'd say like coffee gives us energy. Maybe it'll give plants energy. And we would do plants, and you could even have one group do the water and one group do the vinegar and one do the coffee, so that you don't have to buy quite as much. But that is a really great one if you want to do that too.
Plus time too. If you're doing plants, make sure you have enough time.
Yes. And heads and tails hold different amounts of water. That's really great. So that's a great conversation to have with your kids about constants. What do we need to keep constant? What if your group did the head side and my group did the tail side? Are we going to get the same results or different results? Why do we think that is? So that's really great conversation to have with the kids. Thank you for saying that. All right. And I believe our last slide we're going to end on tonight. Highly recommend. We'll download this and we will upload it into the training folder on Canvas. But I really recommend here, I tried to find some of those questions that I want you asking those kids on the regular. So take a screenshot, you could blow these up and put them on the wall. What is a control group? They need to know that. What is the difference between an experiment and other types of scientific investigations? What does every scientific investigation start with? How could you make the results of an experiment more valid? And there's a few answers to that one. I said perform at least 3 trials. This next one, they always get wrong. Should an experiment be considered invalid if the results do not match your prediction? They're like, yeah, we'll have to start again. No, that's okay. It leads to new questions and new experiments, and that's what we want. You can read through the last few there because I'm going to pause because we are out of time. And I wanted to let you know, Jamie just dropped in the chat the forms link. So that's kind of our attendance for tonight. So if you could click on that, there's just a few questions. Give us a little bit of feedback. If you have any questions we didn't get answered, you can drop them in there. We'll stick around for a few minutes if you have questions that you want to get answered before you go. So let us know if there's anything else.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We just want we want to make sure you feel comfortable with this. It's a lot different than our content standards. With these logic type based processes. So it can be daunting and overwhelming to try to teach the nature of science, the practice of science. So we just want to make sure you're comfortable with that as you go through those units. So thank you guys very much.
Yes, and it just went away, so I don't know who it was or if it was an accident or if I did something, but somebody had a hand raised. Did you have a question? You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Stay safe out there.
Yep, drive safely. Still some weather out there, guys. So if you've done your forms link and if you don't have anything else, have a good night.
One of them flew away. Yes, sorry, I'm going back to some of the questions
Oh, yeah.
with the 2 feet. One of them flew away. Yes, that's the polite answer.
Great job with Canva.
Yes, Lisa, are you fifth grade? Lisa Monty? Oh, so I guess you're thinking more,
District showcase type.
yeah,
Yeah, there's several schools that actually do theirs in first semester.
right. But I don't know if this year with the new calendar, um, because with the nature of science unit, we're really
Yeah.
we're going to have a few days that are devoted to doing experiments, but some other days where we're practicing, like you saw, observation and inference and different types of investigation. So it's not all devoted to just one experiment. Um, there is, I think, some time science projects. It's on the calendar for April 1st through 12th. So make that of that what you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have, yeah, you got Enterprise Village, all that good stuff in there. I
Yeah.
mean, I do have some schools I know that actually do them. Sometimes they do it like before school or after school. But I've had some schools that actually do their projects before winter break. Not many.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the spring. I totally agree. We've always tried to instill to try to make it a year process. Don't do everything in the spring. Like actually break it up. Like get your research and your testable question done 1 month, and then the next month maybe start gathering your materials, and then the next month to actually do the experiment, and then the next month to do it, and then just kind of break it up into pieces. So that's just one way to do it.
Yeah.
That way, by the spring, maybe all you have left is a couple pieces, and then it's just if you're doing a school showcase, um, it's all ready to go. You just have to put it on a board, and then if you want to judge it for a district showcase, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if you even get half done, and maybe you get the actual data up to your data collection possibly. And then later on you can do all your final like procedures and results and conclusions and real world uses and all that stuff. Oh, that's a good idea. Have them actually do the trials at home. Yeah. That'll save time too.
Yep.
Perfect. Good. Do you have any other questions before we log off?
He's trying to join.
She might have got kicked
Yeah.
earlier. She was on here earlier.
Okay.
We're getting ready to log off here. Anybody else? Last second.
Hey guys, sorry, I was parking the car and I'm like, I can't do the forms. Hang on, I got to do it on my
Oh.
laptop. So
Did
that was
did you?
oh my
Okay.
God, I loved it. Great job, guys.
Oh, thank you. Did you get
Thank
the
you.
forms link?
No, I'm about to go right now into the chat. I just couldn't do it on my phone when I was driving.
Okay. Let me know you got it before we log off. I just want to make sure you have it.
Okay. Let's see.
If I need to repost it, I can do that too.
Yeah, will you? There's nothing there.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
I wanted so bad to tell you about the pelican mouth. That I love that picture. It's so cool.
Oh yeah.
And then I thought the same thing. The poor thing flew away. Let's be sweet. Come on, didn't get eaten. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lisa, for your comments too. Appreciate it. Yeah, we could totally we could do a 6-hour training on this. Trust me.
All right, bye guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good to
Bye.
see you. Yeah. Go squeezed into 1 hour. Yeah, we could spend many hours on this.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
I think we're good. I think our other friends might just be
Chilling,
AFK.
possibly. Yeah.
All right.
All right.